Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Build, test, deploy unified DevOps with Salesforce and Provar. We'll be getting things started here. I'll go over our agenda for today, and then I'll do some introductions, and then we'll kick things off. First and foremost, we'll be talking through what DevOps is like with and without testing, and some of the pros and cons there, and kind of the things that we've observed and that I've observed throughout my time at Provar, and just talking through the challenges that we've seen in the industry around incorporating test automation and DevOps. I'll provide an overview of the solution space, and then I'll hand it over to John, who will talk about how we can deliver those trusted agents and apps with Salesforce and partner tooling. Then, of course, we'll have a live demo showcasing it all together on how you can set up your DevOps testing pipeline with Provar, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So I'll kick things off today. My name is Michael Dailey. I'm PBU Director here at Provar. I manage our Provar Manager application and our integrations for our next-gen platform. And I'm joined today by John Belo. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm John. I've been with Salesforce for 10 years, and I lead our DXALM product space. Those are products such as Salesforce Code Analyzer, DevOps Center, DevOps Testing, DX Inspector, and a few additional products in the ISV partner space.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us today, John.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
All right. So I'll be getting things kicked off with talking through the challenges with test automation and DevOps. So this is kind of the overview of some of the kind of a preview of what I'll be showing whenever we talk through the demo, but this is kind of a typical release cycle or pipeline, if you can imagine it that way. This is DevOps with testing. This is kind of the state that each of these environments would be in. So we kind of start the typical development process for Salesforce usually begins in either a scratch org or a developer sandbox. And this is where you would perform a lot of your unit testing. This is, handling those basic cases of catching syntax errors, basic errors in logic and different things like that, and making sure that all your security is under control from the get-go in terms of user permissions and access to fields and object metadata and all that. Now we get into the next layer, which is kind of, you could separate this into different developer sandbox. I've seen teams handle this differently. This is where you would typically incorporate integration testing. The main purpose here is to detect issues that you may have with integrations with other tooling or systems outside of Salesforce, but also your internal Salesforce applications that interoperate with one another. This is also useful for validating merges if you're working on multi-developer teams. So this is where you have that integration layer where all the developer sandboxes are coming into one environment and making sure that they don't have any impact on one another. So again, the big benefit here is that you're detecting those issues earlier on and handling those dependencies at the front end. Now we get into further on the right-hand side, and this is moving towards production as we go. We get into more functional and end-to-end testing. Typically, this is in either a partial copy sandbox or maybe even a full copy sandbox, depending on how many of these you may have. But this is where you would really start confirming whether or not your user scenarios are working and your business flows are working cross-object, cross-system, and end-to-end. And then you may or may not have a UAT or a staging environment, depending on your organization maturity and setup. But this is where you would create basically a full copy sandbox of your production. And this would be to confirm real world scenarios and real world readiness in terms of validating things like all the data is correct, permissions, edge cases. This is where you would typically hand it off to the business team where they would do UAT and they would make sure that those scenarios are passing in that environment with all the integrations set up. And then this is the last stage, typically before you get into production. This is where we're doing it live, and this is where we have all that is up to this point as helping us to ensure that we have confident, stable releases, and we're reducing those hot fixes and town time, and resulting in ultimately fewer escalations and happier users. So that's the end goal with testing in DevOps, is that each of these stages have these different testing gates along the way. Now we'll talk about there's one more animation there. Skipping tests. Basically, the end result here is that skipping testing doesn't save time. It just multiplies that risk. So now this is talking about DevOps without testing. I didn't correct this in my slide at the top there, but that should say without. So now let me go back here. Sorry. Unit testing in this stage, this is where we would have a typically, again, if we're not performing testing at these different stages, where we're just basically skipping all of these. So kind of the next iteration of this is that if we just eliminate all those stages, we eliminate all those testing processes, basically what we're doing is what I like to call live debugging, where we're not actually doing any testing along the way. We're kind of just pushing things directly into production. This actually happens more often than we'd care to admit especially in the Salesforce ecosystem. I see this quite often where business users may assume that just because things are properly tested in their environment, either with Agentforce or flows, that they're not really covering a lot of edge cases. They're not doing proper integration testing. They're not doing proper end-to-end testing and validations either. So let me talk through, kind of some of the challenges there. So we talked about DevOps with and without testing and kind of what the results are there. And really the reason why DevOps without testing tends to exist is because there are a lot of challenges associated with implementing it. And probably the primary cause for all this is that it does require this culture shift. Anytime you hear DevOps talked about in the ecosystem, people refer to it in different ways. There's numerous definitions you'll find online, but at the end of it, it's all about the culture that you have at your company when it comes to development and testing. And that's a very hard thing to change for companies that have been around for a long time. Another part of this is that tools and your tool set is working against you because there's so many tools that we all use day to day. We have our project management, release management, test automation, development tools, IDEs, co-pilots, all these different platforms that we're interoperating with, and they tend to not always work seamlessly with one another. There is a lot of headache associated with integrating them and setting them up and all of that. So that can be a challenge when it comes to actually implementing all of this. And then there's the actual time sink that you have to invest in actually implementing your test automation, because creating testing and creating mature DevOps processes does take time. And there's not always a clear objective there at the outset of that endeavor. There's not always a clear idea of what the ROI should be, what we should be getting out of this, what are our clear metrics that we should gain. I would encourage you all to look at DORA metrics for DevOps. This is a popular system that's been adopted pretty widely by the ecosystem in terms of how to evaluate your DevOps processes. But if you just look up DORA metrics, you'll see some more information about that on how you could get a clear idea of how to improve your DevOps maturity. And this is something that I've seen in a previous role before I joined Provar, and with some of the companies that we've worked with, and some of our customers have this problem as well, is that they don't necessarily have clear alignment between their QA teams and their dev teams. And really what this results in is that your testing process ends up getting pushed either to the end of the sprint or in the next iteration or even in the next release. And this happens quite often where you don't necessarily have clear alignment between the developers and the QAs. Testing becomes a bottleneck and not an enabler in your actual process as it should be. And this is something that we also see quite often in terms of the test automation space, is that there's not a lot of good reporting and analytics out there in terms of how to report on your testing processes. The business doesn't have clear insight into what you're actually performing and what those tests are covering and what those tests are being linked to in terms of your releases. So if you perform a release or a promotion, you want to know exactly which test cases are being ran and whether or not they passed, but also, what the significance of that is. So being able to set different thresholds is also important. So now I want to get into kind of the problem space a little bit more around Salesforce testing specifically, because that's more of our topic today. Now, we talked about DevOps and testing, kind of the challenges there. Salesforce is really more of a platform as a service, right? It's kind of this vertical stack of all these different components and architectures that we can use to implement our solutions and our applications. And each layer requires additional levels of testing. So as we look at this in the context of now Agentforce, we have another layer that we're adding into the mix here that kind of crosses all of these, because Agentforce interacts with all of our object data, all of our records, all of our metadata in our org. It deals with different permission sets and profiles and access to different things like that. And also it's going to be interacting with Agentforce actions, topic actions, which will utilize Apex, they will utilize Flow, and there's a lot of other things that could be incorporated there. So you want to be able to make sure that you're covering all of that when you're testing. Now, it seems like a lot here, and it is, and that's why I've kind of kept all the text here in this slide just to kind of emphasize the fact that there's a lot of uh, different things that you need to incorporate and consider when you're going about testing your Salesforce implementation, particularly with Agentforce, again, because there's another layer that we're adding in here. So I'm going to move on now to kind of talking more about the solution space. So in terms of Provar, what we really are is an end-to-end test automation solution built for Salesforce. When we say end-to-end, people can mean different things by that. What we mean is we're covering Salesforce, but we're also covering all the systems and all the things that you may interact with in a typical user journey. So that would include your API endpoints, that would include your databases that you're interacting with, your external web applications, and anything that's on platform in Salesforce, as well as all your industry clouds and your experience clouds and things like that. So end to end for us means all the applications that would be under test. And we do this through a scalable solution that allows you to build these reliable tests at scale in the Salesforce context. So we have a lot of Salesforce native functionality. And part of that is going to be showcased today in our demonstration when we talk about how DevOps Center and DevOps testing integrate with Provar and how we're enabling that Salesforce native technology through our test automation as well. But we'll get into that as we get into the demo a little bit later. But the main thing here is that the test cases in Provar, the kind of the big differentiator for us is that the tests themselves are not specific to any particular org or user persona or environment or anything like that. We like to call them org agnostic. So you create a test case in one environment, your dev sandbox, and then you're able to rerun that same test case in all of your other environments as you migrate those changes downstream. So it gives you greater reusability and it gives you less maintenance overall when you have that reusability for your same test cases. Now, really quickly, this is just kind of getting into that end-to-end a little bit more in a picture form. So we have the end-to-end coverage on the left-hand side here and then integrations on the right. As I mentioned before, one of the challenges with implementing CI/CD and testing and DevOps is the integration layer, is that your tools tend to work against you. So Provar, this is kind of our full stack here, and this isn't even a comprehensive list of all the tools that we integrate with, because this list is growing as we find more tools that our users are wanting to incorporate. But just to kind of show you a preview of what that is, this is all the tools that we would integrate with in your CI/CD process. This could be project management tooling, release management, DevOps, version control, different things like that, and reporting and all of that. So all those would be enabled out of the box. On the left-hand side, this is just kind of hitting home the fact that we're not just focused on the Salesforce clouds and Salesforce platform, but we're also able to test enterprise applications such as Oracle, SAP, and NetSuite, and different things like that. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now, and I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to take us through his.
So I'll start with a quick reminder. I'll be making some forward-looking statements throughout my presentation today. Please make your decisions based on features that are currently available. And many of you over the years have been building applications using the Salesforce platform. Those applications might be, say, extensions to some of our core products, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, maybe augmentations on top of our industry products, maybe full custom apps. You've been also using our App Exchange partners to add new capabilities to your products and to your users, right? Over the last couple of years, we've been talking about something new, which is Agentforce, and this ability for you to actually build your agents, to build agent actions, and to use the same capabilities that are there in our Salesforce platform, like Michael mentioned earlier, Apex actions, flow actions, API connectivity, all parts of Agentforce, right? So there's this new concept that we're introducing here, which is the ability for you to build agents, agentic apps, and so on, and still benefit from the same trusted platform, the same trust layer that we have as part of our Customer 360 and Salesforce platform. But primarily, what I was talking about earlier was about the capabilities that we give you as Salesforce customers to actually build applications, right? But what Michael was alluding to earlier is that there's a bigger process that you need to think about. And in our world, we've been talking about this concept of Salesforce ALM, how you take a concept from an idea to actually implement it, to actually test it properly and thoroughly, ultimately releasing it to your users, making sure it's actually being adopted. And then at some point in the future, you might even take it away as an end-of-life feature or product, right? So Salesforce ALM for us means effectively a set of best practices, like Michael was talking about earlier, right? Around ensuring that all changes flow through a particular process and are adhering to best practices, right? So this idea of ensuring that changes go through the appropriate approval processes, that you have source control as a single source of truth, so you can understand where changes are coming from, who has made those changes, and so on. That there's a set of environments that changes flow through at the right point in time. You are testing the environments with the appropriate test strategy in place, again, as we were touching upon earlier. And this empowers your teams to come together and collaborate, pro code, local developers, to build these amazing tools using automation where it makes most sense, either test automation or kind of deployment, CI/CD automation or integration, to really accelerate how you're delivering innovation to your end users, but doing so while maintaining quality. So the question now becomes whether this new world of AI and agentic apps, whether these principles still remain. Now, our perspective is that yes, they're actually more important than ever. That cultural shift around adopting these best practices is more important than ever, ensuring that you thoroughly test your apps and your agents to ensure that they are responding to the right to the behavior you kind of expect them to do. That's quite important, right? And what we've been doing as part of this ALM space is really driving some innovation across the board around our tools to allow teams of local developers, pro code developers to come together and be able to deliver on this vision around ensuring that every single solution that hits a production environment Salesforce follows best practices, right? So let me walk you through what that means in practice and some of our tools, right? A few years ago, we introduced DevOps Center. DevOps Center is free and available to all Salesforce customers, and it's our core release management tool that allows you to effectively set up a pipeline consisting of a number of environments, and then you're able to track changes that happen, for instance, in your development environment, identify those changes as part of a work item, commit them to source control, and we support GitHub, we support Bitbucket today. And the release manager can then, simply using kind of point and click, move changes between environments and ultimately all the way to production. So we have this modern UI where you can do all of this, but there are also concepts of teams, or say of hybrid teams of developers that might actually be used a different flow. Maybe they just want to commit to source control directly, as they've been doing for the past, I don't know how many years. And that flow still works perfectly fine with DevOps Center. So what happens is that in DevOps Center, you're able to create a branch within version control, like a feature branch. Developers can commit changes directly there, and those changes can actually be seen and tracked and promoted directly from DevOps Center, which means that you are, again, delivering innovation faster to your users and making everyone in your teams more productive than ever, right? But this is kind of the starting point, right? We are delivering a lot of innovation beyond that. Earlier this year, we talked about the DX Inspector, which is this new bar that you've seen across most of our sandbox environments that will keep expanding to other environments in the near future. And the DX Inspector represents a paradigm shift on how we provide ALM tools to you. So while DevOps Center typically runs solely in the production environment, or maybe in a dedicated org just to manage your kind of pipeline, right? It uses this concept of what we call a hub. So DevOps Center being the hub, and then you have a number of orgs connected to it, which are the kind of the spokes, right? Well, with the DX Inspector, we are effectively empowering each one of these development environments with the ability to carry out some ALM operations. So first of all, and this is what you can do today, you can go to the DX Inspector, say in your Dev Sandbox, you can see which changes have taken place because the DX Inspector is using source tracking. By the way, quick note on source tracking, you can now activate source tracking in an existing sandbox. You don't actually need to refresh it. That has been available already for a few months. So you can see the changes that have been performed in that environment. You can also connect to DevOps Center to see which changes have been committed or not, and you're able to determine which ones are still a gap that you might need to commit in the future. And that's all available for you today, right? But I wanted to kind of touch on what's coming at Reinforce and give you a little bit of a sneak peek and on how we're thinking of evolving the DX Inspector here. So our idea is that all of these development teams that typically are working in sandboxes, in scratch orgs, and so on, are going to be empowered to again, carry out some of these ALM operations. So they'll actually be able to identify these changes in their dev sandbox, and from the dev sandbox, they'll be able to commit those changes directly to DevOps Center without having to go to DevOps Center and effectively pull those changes, which is the experience you have today. But beyond that, if you're used to using change sets and that's your tool of choice, well, we're actually coming up with something which is effectively the evolution of change sets. So within the X Inspector, you're going to be able to see all of your metadata changes. And in addition to that, you're going to be able to see your data changes, specifically around configuration data, because we know a lot of you use objects to track configuration data. We do that for some of our own industry products. Some of our IC partners use configuration data as well. And it has always been challenging to move and track these changes across multiple environments. So with the X Inspector, you're going to be able to deploy metadata and data, configuration data specifically, to another environment. And ultimately, that will allow you to move those changes all the way to production. And we're going to keep investing in this, and you'll see some really new and exciting things that I'm not talking about today at Dreamforce. So tune in to Dreamforce. We have a ton of exciting stuff that we're going to be announcing in this ALM space. Now let me dive a little bit more deeply into this kind of testing area, right? Because this is also another part where we've been investing quite a lot, right? I talked about DevOps Center. DevOps Center has these concepts of projects where people are coming together to deliver some new feature or new product and so on. This concept of pipelines in multiple environments, work items, which are effectively the changes that flow through the pipeline, and of course the connection to source control. And as people interact with DevOps Center, they are firing DevOps events, right? And those events are the perfect opportunity for us to run automated tests. And that's why we introduced DevOps testing, to ensure that we allow all of these teams to really shift left and fix problems earlier as part of their DevOps lifecycle. So in order to do that, we created a new testing data model. So DevOps testing has this concept of test suites, which are basically groups of tests. These test suites can be assigned to different stages in the pipeline. If you think about what Michael was showing earlier, where certain tests are taking place at certain points in the pipeline, it allows you to do exactly that. And when those tests run, we will evaluate those results and compare them against particular criteria that you set as part of quality gate rules. So if your changes, for instance, are resulting in certain failures, you might just automatically block that promotion from going through, and you force the development teams to go back and fix these issues, right? DevOps testing by itself doesn't really do any testing. What it does is integrate with a number of testing tools, and it's effectively this unification layer around all of them, right? So we have a number of Salesforce tools such as Code Analyzer, Agentforce Testing Center. We're going to be talking about Apex and Flow testing in a bit. And we have many partners working with us, and that list is going to keep growing, like Provar, of course, coming in and adding these end-to-end testing capabilities on top of what we provide in DevOps testing. DevOps testing by itself is free. Then, of course, the tools might vary. Some are free, some might be commercial, but it does allow you to have that unified perspective. And that means you can create the appropriate testing plans per project. You can fire off those automated tests based on those key DevOps events. You can have that unified test execution across multiple test providers, then get all the results. And based on those results, the quality gate rules are going to be evaluated, and they will potentially block those low quality changes and effectively allow you to address those problems earlier. Now, coming back to the topic of agents, what does this mean? So, well, with DevOps testing, you can use Agentforce Testing Center to ensure that your agents are coming up, say, with the correct topics, with identifying the correct actions, that they are providing the accurate responses, and even any custom evals, which you can do in Testing Center, those will also be reflected correctly in DevOps testing. Code Analyzer allows you to scan flows, allows you to scan Apex, and also even agent metadata to ensure it adheres to your best practices. And later this year, around Dreamforce, we're going to have the ability for you to also run Apex unit tests and flow tests again as part of your DevOps pipeline with DevOps testing. And that kind of starts to complete this journey around ensuring that your agents are tested thoroughly. But the missing piece is effectively what Michael was alluding to earlier, which is our partner ecosystem, right? So ensuring that your agents can go through, say, an end-to-end test like they can with Provar, right? And that's quite important. And we're going to, again, keep expanding this collection here to augment our story around agent testing. Now, for those of you that are developers and prefer to operate more in the kind of pro-code, Apex space, and Lightning Web Components and so on, we have Salesforce Code Analyzer. It has already been there for a few years. It allows you to scan code for particular problems, such as security, such as performance, and so on. And what we announced earlier this year was Colonizer 5, which has been completely rebuilt from scratch to have a lot more capabilities, right? So I will start with an important one, right? It is AI powered, which means that Colonizer, which was traditionally something that you used to scan and identify problems, can now scan, identify problems, and now fix them thanks to our integrations with Apex Guru for performance issues in Apex and Agentforce for developers. Agentforce for developers, we can use it today to already address a number of problems in Apex. And that is already available today. By the way, Colonizer 5, if I haven't said this earlier, is also free, available for everyone to use. You can already fix a lot of problems in Apex with Agentforce for developers, and we're going to move into the LWC space maybe early next year. It's pretty much available across all of our core developer experiences. That means the CLI and the IDE. We have a GitHub action and, of course, DevOps testing, as I mentioned earlier. And that gives you over 500 different rules across a number of different what we call engines. Engines are basically the open source tools that actually scan your code. Colonizer is basically sitting on top of those as a unified layer, right? And that allows you to leverage things such as Apex PMD, the leading open source code scanner for Apex, ESLint, again, leading for JavaScript, TypeScript, LWC, and so on. And we added a couple of new engines with Colonizer 5, one to scan your code for regular expressions, one to scan flows for particular security anti-patterns. And again, all of this available to you to use today, right? One important thing that we did as well was to kind of change the Colonizer experience a little bit. So if you're a new user, you're going to now be able, with a single command, and without using any optional flags or parameters, with a single command, you can run a recommended set of rules. And that recommended set of rules was created by Salesforce. Right? We worked in partnership with various product teams to identify what would be the most relevant kind of rules to run for a typical Salesforce developer. So that will be our kind of default experience. But Colonizer is actually heavily used in CI/CD. That's largely most of our users today, right? So I would say that we added something quite powerful for our power users and our CI/CD users, which is a new YAML file where you can configure pretty much everything in Colonizer. That means you can organize your rules using custom tags. You can customize the severity levels for every single one of our rules. You can add your own custom rules across a number of engines. And ultimately, in the future, we're going to allow you to actually run your own custom engines too. Right. So that gives you full control and a lot of capabilities that were not there before with Colonizer 5. The output that we provide in Colonizer is also something that can be either machine readable, which is quite useful for CI/CD, or a very friendly HTML format, which has received a lot of polish, and it's looking really nice for you guys to just read and have something to consume the various issues that you might have within Colonizer. How to get access to it? So in the CLI, just use the SF plugins command to install it. In the IDE, you might not need to do anything because it actually comes as part of our extensions pack for VS Code. In Code Builder, it's already installed by default. And in GitHub, there's a new kind of version 2 of our run Salesforce Colonizer action, so that you can use to run Colonizer as part of your GitHub workflows. And we actually use the same as part of our DevOps testing integration. So DevOps testing already comes with Colonizer as a default. Just need to configure your GitHub action, and you're pretty much kind of ready to go. And with that, let me hand it over to Michael.
With that being said, we're going to transition into the demo element now. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the demo. And this is going to be an overview first and foremost of our DevOps Center pipeline. So here's what we have set up with DevOps Center and DevOps testing. Now, across the top there, that's going to mimic kind of our environments and our sandboxes. So I kind of alluded to this before, but we basically have two different developer sandboxes, Dev A and Dev B. We have our integration sandbox, UAT, staging, and then finally our production org. So we're going to be showing you what that pipeline looks like in DevOps Center. And then I'll show you as well how I've established all these quality gates and test suites for each of these stages in the pipeline. And all of this, of course, is built using DevOps Center and DevOps testing, which are free for anyone who's on the DevOps platform or on the Salesforce platform, rather. And then we have our Provar integration, which is going to be utilizing our managed package, Provar Manager. And then our automation, which is actually going to be running our test cases behind the scenes. So this is an overview of that. Again, we have different levels of quality gates that we're kind of adding as we go along here. We can increase the level of quality gates. We could add different quality gates and different test suites to each stage in this pipeline, and I'll show you what that looks like in DevOps Center in the demo. But let me walk through very quickly kind of what the setup phase for this is like so you can kind of see what this would be like if you were to build this out on your own. So the first step that you typically would have is you would install, of course, DevOps Center, but then you would define your pipeline. So similarly to how I had my pipeline overview there, you define your pipeline, which would be, connecting to all of your environments that you would be migrating your changes through and setting those as a particular stage in your pipeline. So you create that as your release pipeline, starting from your development environments all the way up to production. Then you connect your different testing providers. So this is a DevOps testing feature that allows you to connect to different quality tools such as Salesforce Code Analyzer, Provar, Agentforce Testing Center, Skill Center, and other testing providers as well. So those are going to be the ones that I'll primarily focus on today. And then the next stage will be establishing those quality gates. These quality gates allow us to not only block poor code quality and prevent us from pushing bad code or lack of unsecure code downstream, but also any kind of misconfigurations that we want to catch through functional testing or failed tests for our Agentforce agents that may be caught in Agentforce Testing Center as well. So we're covering all the different boxes here with these quality gates. And the next stage, after we've established those quality gates and decided how we're going to move those changes and what defines ready for release, we can author our test cases in Testing Center. We can import our Salesforce Code Analyzer rules and author our tests in Provar. And the next phase of this will be, of course, to assign those test suites, those tests, and the quality gates to each stage in our pipeline. So it's kind of how I showed you in the first overview image there, where I've assigned those test suites and those quality gates. This is kind of that stage there where we would be doing that. So all of that is the setup phase. Once you have all of this done, really it's just business as usual. You're doing your development work, you're doing your testing work, and all of this is kind of working in an automated way behind the scenes. So the execution phase, this is kind of, as I was mentioning, this is the next phase. So this is what I'll actually be demoing. I'm just going to show you kind of line by line here what we're going to be doing. So the first thing they'll be doing is creating and tracking our work items in DevOps Center. I'll show you what DX Inspector looks like, and we'll show you kind of how that looks like in DevOps Center as well, and the work item changes. And then we'll show you how we can promote those changes using the commit and promote option directly within DevOps Center. Show you kind of how that kicks off the validation process in both our GitHub Actions, but also our DevOps testing quality gates. And then we'll observe those gates in action and kind of show you what those look like. We'll look at a previous run so you can see what the actual test cases and the results look like in DevOps testing. And then we'll show you how we can look at those individual suite executions. We'll look at the individual quality gates and see whether those have been passed so we can migrate those changes further downstream. Once everything has been checked, we can promote those changes, and then we can continue to run our regression in the next level environment, which will be integration. So we have our work that's going to be happening in our Dev B sandbox. Then we're going to be running those changes to our integration layer, where we'll assign a different quality gate and promote those changes further downstream. So this process kind of continues until we get to prod. This is a similar workflow. For those of you that may be operating in other DevOps tools, maybe it's slightly different terminologies, but overall, this is a pretty familiar process, hopefully for those of us in the Salesforce development world. Okay, so let me switch over to the demo now. Let me jump into our first things first here. So I'll show you our DevOps Center pipeline. I'll make sure my screen's correct. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so this is our pipeline. As I mentioned, we have our 2 developer environments, which could be either Scratch orgs. Again, these could be developer sandboxes as well. And then we have all of our different sandboxes leading up to our production org. So these have all been configured in DevOps Center. So what this will allow us to do is then to define these different stages where we can approve different work items that have been added here or promoted. And then once those have been promoted to the integration layer, it'll kick off the DevOps testing quality gates there to run, and then so on and so forth. So that's the DevOps Center pipeline setup. Now I'll switch over to showing you kind of how the testing providers look inside of DevOps testing. So from DevOps testing, we have the option to connect to various different test providers. You need a test project to connect these to. Once that's been configured, you can establish all these testing providers, and these will sync periodically. You can also trigger the sync manually. And basically what the sync will do is it'll import all of those test cases in that particular provider. So for example, once we have our Salesforce code analyzer set up and we sync it here, it'll sync automatically upon creating it. It'll create for us a mapping for all those test cases. So we'll see our test suites here. We'll see our test suites for Provar. We'll also see all of our test suites, which will be all the rules inside of Code Analyzer, and also all of our Agentforce Testing Center tests will be imported there once we've connected all those different testing providers. So we've connected our testing providers. The next stage would be, again, creating our quality gate rules. Now, these quality gate rules that I've already created, I've already assigned these to our various stages, but I'll show you kind of what that looks like. If you were to create a new one, you just give it a name and a description, and then you can define what level you want this quality gate to be assigned to for those thresholds. This would mainly be for Code Analyzer. So if you have Code Analyzer that's returning different severity codes there, you can set a threshold there. So for example, if you only want it to pass if it's 2 or higher, you don't want any Sev 1 or Sev 2s in your testing process, basically is what that's saying. So that's a pretty typical thing that you would want if you're doing managed package development. This is something that we actually configure on our own. For our managed package Provar Manager, we have Code Analyzer in use, and we've utilized that particular feature there. Now, we also have a capability here to set a passing threshold. This is primarily for if we want to allow some level of wiggle room there. If we don't want it to necessarily be 100%. We could set it to 100%, of course, if we don't want any failures. But if we're running maybe regression tests or functional tests, there may be a smaller threshold there, like 85% or something like that. So this would allow us some wiggle room in that. And then we can also check for specific test failures. So for example, if we set the threshold below 100, if we check this box, we can enable particular tests that we do not allow to fail, basically, before the process moves forward. So it gives you a lot of flexibility there on how you want to define those rules. Once a rule has been defined and you've imported your tests from those testing providers, the next stage, as I said, is assigning those to our various stages. Now, these stages have been imported directly from DevOps Center. So we have all of our pipeline stages represented here. This is our work item stage, which is basically our developer sandbox stage. We'll take a look at that one. Basically, all I've done is I've assigned a couple of test suites and a couple of quality gate rules to this one. So I'll show you what that looks like here. First and foremost, you can assign those test suites. So the test suites that I've assigned are mainly for Code Analyzer, checking a couple of different things for best practices, security, recommended, a couple of different rule sets that I've defined here. And then I've also defined a test suite for Provar to run our Coral Cloud Service Agent test suite, which will be testing our Agentforce agent. And then for each of those, we can define different quality gate rules for those test suites. So for example, if we say impacted test should pass, which is one of my quality gate rules, I've already assigned that to this particular test suite. So basically, this shows you those assignments here. So for Code Analyzer, I'm saying no Sev 1 or Sev 2 issues. And then for Provar, I'm saying all the tests should pass. So this is 100% pass rate that we're looking for here. So those quality gate rules have been assigned. We set up our pipeline. We set up our stage assignments and all of that. The next stage from here would be to actually look at how we want to migrate our changes and utilize DevOps Center. So in DevOps Center, of course, you can create work items. Now, these work items are different ways of tracking your work inside of Salesforce. So once you are connected your developer sandbox, let's just do a test work item here just to show you what this looks like very quickly. I'll assign this to myself. Now, once you've created that work item, you can choose which environment you want to track those changes in. So I've already done this for one of my environments, so I won't go through this process again here. But you can select which of your development environments, or if you want to perform those changes outside of DevOps Center, if you're doing more of a developer workflow, you may go with this option. So the two work in tandem pretty well. Now we can go in and look at an existing one that I was looking at here. So this work item is already in progress, and I've already committed some changes to this particular branch. So as soon as you create that work item and it goes into the in progress stage here, we'll have a version control branch that is created for us in GitHub to track that. So we can take a look at that just to show you what that looks like. But this particular work item branch already has some of our changes that we've pushed to this particular work item being tracked there in DevOps Center. Now, if we want to perform further changes, all the changes will of course be tracked here because we have source tracking enabled for the sandbox, but we can also utilize DX Inspector to take a look at those. So let me go and look at this particular work item. I'm going to be updating an agent. Basically, this particular agent doesn't currently have the action that we need to retrieve some session data on some bookings for the Coral Cloud Resorts application. So we're going to be adding that to our agent and showing you how we can pull those changes in from DevOps Center. So if I go to our agents in our DevB sandbox here, this is the Coral Cloud agent that we currently have. And if we look at our agent here, these are the topic actions that are currently available. So if we want to add a new action, we can create a new one, or we can add this one from our asset library. We can just go ahead and look for that here. Reservation time slots. So we'll go ahead and click finish there. So we'll add this action to our agent topic instructions. Now, normally what you would do in a typical workflow, if you're, you would refresh your conversation preview here in Agentforce Builder, and you'd go ahead and test it, do some spot checking, sanity testing, and all of that. But because I already have quality gates enabled and all those things, I'm going to rely on that process to kind of do all of my checking for me. I'm not going to add any kind of manual work here. So I've added in that topic action here. I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and just activate it. And then we'll move over into our, I'll show you in DX Inspector, basically those changes being tracked. So if we look at DX Inspector here, we can see that those changes have already been pulled in inside here. So these are the changes that will actually be pushing into DevOps Center. So you can see them being tracked here. As John alluded to earlier, in the future updates, those will be there'll be an option here where we can go directly to DevOps Center and commit those changes from this menu. Currently, we'll switch over to DevOps Center and show you how that works now. So if we switch over to this work item, we can go ahead and do a pull changes. We now have an update for that particular agent. So we can add our update here and we say added new agent topic action. And we'll just go ahead and commit those changes. Now, once those changes have been committed, again, it's committing them directly to that work item branch. And in this case, my commit failed. Probably something configuration from my side, not an issue with DevOps Center itself. Probably just need to do a refresh there. Either way, I'll show you an existing work item just to kind of show you what that looks like over here. Go ahead and create a review for this one. Okay, so let's pretend that passed. I had an error in my other branch, so it's a configuration issue on my side. Once you create that review, what happens is it'll create a pull request in GitHub for me automatically. Now that pull request will, of course, kick off any GitHub actions that we have. So we have some GitHub actions that are actually running our code analyzer workflow. So we'll see that kicked off here. We'll also have our DevOps testing quality gates being triggered as well. So in DevOps Center, what's happening is it's basically telling us we can't promote this yet because the tests are still running or they haven't passed. So it's blocking me from promoting these changes because it's waiting for those quality gates to come back as a passing status. So I'll show you what that looks like in DevOps testing really quickly. So if we go over to here, we can see our quality gates. If we look at our suite executions, we'll have some new executions that will be running here. And basically, once these kick off, all the results will be reported here. But we'll also be able to see those for the particular quality gate rules as well. So if we take a look at our execution groups, this is the one that's currently en route. So this is one I ran earlier today, but this is the one that's just been kicked off from that particular work item. So that one's currently in progress. Basically, it'll run all of our test cases in Provar. It'll run all our quality gate rules in Code Analyzer as well. So I'll show you what a previous execution looked like here. We have all of our statuses, of course, reported here directly. And we have all of our test suite executions, which have been reported. So we had our 100% pass rate on all of our code analyzer rules and our agent test case passed as well. So that change was good to promote. So all of our quality gates passed. So that particular work item, we were able to switch over into the promote status, which was this work item here. So once all those quality gates have been passed, we can check this over into ready to promote in DevOps Center. And then that'll allow us to go into our pipeline view inside of DevOps Center and promote those work items further downstream. Now, from here on, it's basically just doing the same thing. You're promoting those work items. You can create bundles as you get into later stages, but each of those promotions will trigger the DevOps Center, DevOps testing, quality gate rules as they are encountered in those stages. So that's kind of the full end-to-end flow there. That's the full development process, what it's like working with DevOps Center, DevOps testing, and Provar. Again, the big benefit here in working with a tool like DevOps Center and Provar is that Provar is a Salesforce managed package. So it's already available for those of you that are operating in that environment. It's directly integrated into Salesforce and DevOps Center. So you don't have to set up any kind of external third-party integrations or anything like that. The data never leaves Salesforce. You don't have to worry about security or anything like that happening as well. If we have any questions, go ahead and throw those into the Zoom Q&A and we can take a look at those.
Or maybe I'll ask a question if
Sure.
everybody's shy, right? So yeah, tell us what can we do to make your life easier in terms of the Salesforce tools that we provide to help you test and deploy and deliver your solutions.
Yeah, always looking for good feedback.
See a question there around the Provar workshops. Out of the box integration with Copilot, we do have it for DevOps testing. We do have a Copilot robotic testing integration as well.
Oh, looks like there's questions in the chat. I was looking in the Q&A.
Yeah,
I missed those. Sorry.
Oh, maybe you can address the last one, Michael, on Tricentis.
Yeah, so the question is how Provar is better than other tools like TestRingo, Tricentis, Tosca. Yeah, so I think in terms of test automation, there's not usually a one-size-fits-all approach. It really just depends on what your requirements are and what you're primarily testing. Provar has been around for over 10 years, and our main goal has been to make Salesforce testing easier. So that's kind of why we were founded. That's why we exist. So to test Salesforce and everything around Salesforce. From what I understand, Tricentis is mainly focused on SAP and kind of that space. So if your primary use cases are around SAP, then Tricentis may be a better fit in that particular regard. But if your focus is around Salesforce, Agentforce, anything that Salesforce touches, then I would definitely recommend a tool that is, tailor fitted for that had more native functionality and integrations with, platform features such as DevOps Center. So. There was a question about workshops to learn more about Provar and step-by-step demo. Yeah, so be interested, whatever you're particularly interested, be interested to follow up with you on that note. We can definitely provide a more tailored demo if that's what you're asking about on Provar itself, because today was primarily focused on our integration with DevOps testing and DevOps Center. But if you're more so looking into Provar automation and our other tools, then yeah, we can definitely follow up with you there. Put a note on there. Now we got some other questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, so support for test failure analysis, DevOps, I assume DevOps testing, right? So not at this stage. At this stage, we will give you the results. You can, of course, create your own analysis around that. We haven't provided anything out of the box just yet, but in future, we do aspire to give you some of those capabilities.
Yeah, there was a question about integration with Azure DevOps. I'm not sure if you mean for Provar or for DevOps Center. But on the Provar side, I can speak to that. We have a direct integration with ADO, Azure DevOps, inside of our application. So that allows you to, of course, import all of your projects and associated work items and different things like that into Provar and link those to your test cases. And we can also run tests directly on ADO pipelines as well, if that's a requirement. So that's from the Provar side.
Yeah, and we do, by the way, there is a community integration between CodeAnalyzer and Azure DevOps, which might also be quite useful for you guys to use.
Well, thank you everyone so much for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Be excited to continue the conversation with us. You can find us both on LinkedIn, Michael Dailey, John Belo. Thank you so much again, John, for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, everyone. Bye. Have a good day.